is the fourth lesson in our present series in Adventures in Learning. This course is called Archaeology and Everyday Life in Bible Times. Did you ever talk to someone who came to visit our country from the Middle East? Did you ever know what surprises them a lot about America? It's the fact that our country is so green and we have so much water. You know, we are very rich in what most of the world lacks. When we take our showers, wash our cars, we don't think about that we are using a lot of water, when there are many parts of the world when water is a most precious commodity. I'd like to read to you a sentence from a letter we received from a friend of ours who is a missionary in Nigeria. We just received it a short time ago. The station water supply is brought in by a water truck with river water several times a week. It is piped into large cisterns. Each of some 200 people gets about a bucket a day. Would you like to get along on a bucket a day to do all your work with water? I think it's the thing that surprised me the most on my first trip to the Middle East. When we were in Egypt, I talked to a boy who lived in Aswan, and he was 16 years old. He told me he had never seen rain in his life. He had not seen rain because Egypt is in the middle of a desert, and if it weren't for the Nile River and the irrigation it affords, Egypt would be totally uncultivatable. Israel itself has very little rain. In fact, from May to October, Israel is dry. I would like to show you a few pictures of the problems that some people face in parts of the world that we know nothing about. This first slide is a picture of a woman in Egypt. Can you imagine that when we freely use water to wash our car or water our lawn, that we might have to carry all the water we needed, like this? Or like this boy. These pictures were taken in Egypt very recently. Truly, water is a very precious and a very priceless commodity. This picture was taken in Beersheba, where flocks of sheep and goats are still being watered at wells. In Israel, a few months ago, my husband took this shot of a shepherd pulling water from the well for his flock of sheep. Doesn't that remind you of Old Testament times? And yet it's happening today. Here is a girl at a well outside of her home. And this is a very famous well on land bought by Jacob in Shechem. It was from this well that Jesus asked for water from the woman of Samaria. And here we have a cistern. Cisterns collect as much rain as possible whenever it rains. In fact, in the Bible we read that Uzziah the king dug out many cisterns for his flocks because he had much cattle. When Sennacherib wanted to conquer Hezekiah, and he was besieging the city of Jerusalem, in order to get the people on his side, he said to them, "If I conquer you and you submit to me, I will give to each one of you a cistern." That's because water was so very, very precious. We know about wells. We talked about them when we discussed the tells. The patriarchs were worried about finding water, but we remember that those girls who took care of their flocks had to work with a well. Remember how Eliezer met Rebekah at a well, and Jacob met Rachel at a well, and Moses even met his wife at a well. Cisterns and wells were the two things that the people of Israel and the Middle East countries had to make sure they had in order to have water. Now, I talked to you about tells. Tells were always near water. You remember how a tell was built, a layer cake of dead cities? But they had to make sure before they built on any place at all that they would have a well nearby. There had to be water. But now I told you that this layer cake of dead cities, or the tell, slowly grew higher and higher. And as it grew higher and higher, the water grew farther and farther away because it was outside the city. Oh, Jesus said that a city on a hill cannot be hid, but neither can it be easily supplied with water. The water was always outside the city, and the women would have to go outside in order to get their water. This was a daily event. Some people say it was the place where they socialized. It was their daily news service. In peace, it was very inconvenient to have to go outside the city. But I want to tell you, in war, it was disastrous. Because the well was outside the city was up here, the wall was around the city up here, and the people had to go outside for their water. If they were besieged, what would they do? If the enemy took the water, then the city had to fall. I want to tell you how 3 cities overcame the problem of trying to get water inside their cities. The first one is Gibeon. You all know about Gibeon. It's first mentioned in the book of Joshua. Joshua tells us that, the book of Joshua, that the Gibeonites heard about how Joshua had conquered both Ai and Jericho, and being afraid that they too might be conquered, they sent some of their men as ambassadors to Joshua. And when those men reached Joshua, this is what they said, even though they were very crafty in doing this. This our bread we took hot for our provision out of our houses on the day we came forth to go unto you. But now behold, it is dry and it is moldy. And these bottles of wine which we filled were new, and behold, they be rent. And these our garments and our shoes are become old by reason of our long, long journey. In fact, they had started out with them that way because Gibeon was only about 8 miles from Jerusalem. Joshua accepted their story, you remember. That's the first time that we meet with the Gibeonites. Sometime after that, we learn that the children of Israel put the tabernacle in Gibeon. And Solomon went to Gibeon to sacrifice there after he was made king. And did you know that it was in Gibeon that God asked Solomon what he would like to have? And Solomon did not choose riches or long life, but in Gibeon it was that Solomon chose wisdom. Other things happened there too, and several times the pool of Gibeon is mentioned. Well, there was a certain man in the United States named Dr. James Pritchard, and he had dug many times on different tells in Israel, and he wanted to try one of his own, and so he went to Gibeon. Now, in order to go to Gibeon or to any place like this, you have to talk to the farmers. At that time, the farmers, there were 8 of them who had land on top of Gibeon, and he had to discuss with them whether he would be able to dig. And they said yes, but they wondered what he wanted. The Dead Sea Scrolls had just been found, and someone had heard that on one of those scrolls it said, there are 20 places in Israel where gold is hid. And they said, do you want to find gold? And Dr. Pritchard said, no, not at all. I want to dig to see how people in former days lived, because I know many people lived on your city, in your area. So he had to pay them $15 for each grapevine he took out, or a fig tree. He had to pay them 15 or 25 cents for each tomato plant and so forth. But finally he got the right to be able to dig for a little while. He got the men together, and the next thing you know, Dr. Pritchard and his group were on Tel Gibeon. Well, about 3 days later, they had found the city wall. It was only down about 5 or 6 feet, the first layer that they came across. It was a wall that was 23 feet wide. Some of these city walls were very large. He was happy to find the wall and figured there could be some other important buildings nearby. So they began to dig just a little way in from the wall. They had not been digging very long when one day one of the men put his pick down for lunch. You know, a pick is a handle with a cross piece. And he put his pick down, and instead of it stopping at the ground surface, the pick went all the way in up to the handle. And the fellow whose pick it was pulled the pick out and fell. And there was no bottom that he could reach. So he called Dr. Pritchard, and he said, you know, I must have something here that there's a hole, and I can't feel the bottom of it. Dr. Pritchard came and examined it, and he said, well, let's see how deep that hole is. So they took a nail, and they put it on the end of a string, and they dropped the nail into the hole. And it went down and down and down and down, 16 feet before it hit the bottom. Well, they made the hole bigger, and they took the fellow who had found it and put a rope underneath his shoulders and his arms and lowered him with the flashlight into the hole he had found. All they heard were his surprised grunts. When he came out, he said to them, do you know what's in there? A tunnel, a long tunnel. Do you know what Dr. Pritchard had found? Let me show you. If this is Tel Gibeon, and if here is the wall that they found, then near it, they found this tunnel, which went from here all the way to the outside of the city, down where the well was, so that the people would be able to go down here in this tunnel, and they could cover up the well on the outside, so that if the city were ever besieged, they would be able to have the water from the inside. Now, not too long after that, Dr. Pritchard found, one of his men found a pool. The pool is very large. It's hard to believe, but that pool, which you would have walked over before World War II, that pool is deep enough to hold a 3-story house. And this pool was filled with the trash of the people who had lived in the city. They used it as a garbage dump. But when they cleared it out, 2 seasons it took them to clear out this pool. When they cleared it out, they found that underneath it, there's a spiral stairway that leads like this into the pool. Underneath it, there was another stairway that led down. They couldn't imagine why until they found another room at the bottom, and then they realized that what the people had done was try to find a way to go through so that they might be able to get another tunnel this way to the well, but they came to the water table, and therefore this particular pool was filled with water in both places. The pool of Gibeon is mentioned in several places in the Bible, but it was almost accidentally that Dr. Pritchard was able to find both of these in his excavations. And I'd like to show you pictures of that. They might be a little dark because, remember, it's in a tunnel. Gibeon is mentioned 43 times in the Bible. Today it's known as El Gibeon, and it covers about 16 acres. The tell is about 100 feet high. Now we are at the top of Gibeon, and we are looking down at the countryside. All the fields are flourishing. In the time we took this picture, it was harvest time. This pool of Gibeon, here you see the steps that lead down into the pool on one side. It was completely filled with debris. It's 35 feet across. The first year, Dr. Pritchard and his crew only cleaned out about 30 feet down, and they went down 33 feet the next season, 33 feet more. They reached the bottom of the pool, but do you know that spiral staircase I told you about went down for 49 more feet, and at the bottom was a circular room 23 feet across. This was the groundwater level, and that spring filled the groundwater level with water. There were 42 steps that led to the bottom of the pool itself, but there are 72 steps all the way down. And as I mentioned to you before, the pool was used as a garbage dump by the inhabitants of the tell. They did not realize that their trash would someday become Dr. Pritchard's treasure. On August the 2nd, 1956, a worker named Solomon came to Pritchard carrying the handle of a pottery jar. Is this any good, he asked? It had the name Gibeon on the handle. Pritchard was delighted. In 67 years of digging on 100 sites in the Holy Land, only 2 inscribed handles had been found. They found 20 more later in the debris. You see, Gibeon was the center for winemaking. They thrived on that export. Numerous pits have been found in the limestone in which wine jars were stored, and 63 cellars have been identified. Altogether, those 63 cellars were able to hold 25,000 of our measured gallons of wine in jars. You know that the people in Palestine drank wine. Isn't it interesting that the first time we meet the Gibeonites in the Bible, they come to Joshua with their old wineskins. A few months ago, we were in Gibeon, and we looked for that cave which opens to the spring below the hill. We crawled through the opening, and we stood in the water of a pool at the spring. It was very dark. We were amazed at two boys who scampered through the hole and into the darkness of what we knew had to be the tunnel that Dr. Pritchard's team had found. My husband's pictures turned out very dark, but I hope that you will be able to make out steps and the boys who are posing in the darkness. Hardly can you see them. There are 93 steps in this tunnel, and here is a picture of Dr. Pritchard also that I will show you in just a few minutes. You see the darkness of the tunnel, and the boys are standing on the steps. The steps are just visible in the background. Remember, this tunnel was so dark that we couldn't see a thing. We forgot our flashlights until my husband's flash would go off. This is a picture Dr. Pritchard took of the tunnel. You see the size of it? And they carved it all out from that hill. I asked Dr. Pritchard yesterday, I spoke to him, I said, how did you get this picture to be so light? And he said, I had men standing outside. I had no artificial lighting. I had men standing outside who held large cardboards up, and there was tinfoil all over the cardboards, and it reflected the light into the tunnel. Here you see the bottom steps. You can see how worn they are. Many, many feet traveled on up those particular steps. And at the end of the season, these men were so happy, the men who worked for Dr. Pritchard, because they got more money working for him for this one season than they did all year when they worked on the farms. And at the end of the season, there was not a pick or a hoe or a basket missing. And Dr. Pritchard was just delighted with what he found, and we were very happy this year to be able to go and find that tunnel. So that's what happened to Gibeon. Now let me tell you about Jerusalem. I told you before that Jerusalem is about 35 feet above where it used to be, the time when Jesus was here in the world. But, you know, before that time already, they had a problem in Jerusalem with water. It's already in the book of 2nd Chronicles. I'd like to read a little passage to you. It's at the time that Hezekiah was besieged by Sennacherib. And this is what we read. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that he intended to make war on Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and his military staff about blocking off the water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him. A large force of men assembled, and they blocked all the springs and the stream that flowed through the land. Why should the kings of Assyria come and find plenty of water? They asked. And later, after Hezekiah died, this is what is written. It was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring and channeled the water down to the west side of the city of David. If I could quickly draw you another map, I would like to show you. If this is the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem, here is the Mount of Olives. Here is the spring Gihon outside the city. And what Hezekiah did was build a tunnel. He built his tunnel like this, and then it goes inside the city, and it comes to the pool of Siloam. This is the whole length of the tunnel, and I would like to show you pictures so you can see what those people had to do in that day in order to get water into the city of Jerusalem during the time of the siege. We walked through this. For us, the water was about knee-deep, and you had to slide into it from the area of the spring. The spring has a peculiar feature. Once a day, this spring gushes forth with an overabundance of water, and the level of the water in the tunnel may rise a couple of feet. It can be a frightening experience if you don't know about it, but if you know that this happens every day, you find it exciting. But the gushing did not come while we were walking through. That tunnel is only about 2 feet wide. In places, it is less than 5 feet high, and you have to duck a little as you walk. Imagine, when it was first discovered, there were about 3 feet of sand and dirt, which had collected through the centuries at the bottom of the tunnel. It was cleared out, and now walking through is a good experience. The tunnel is very dark. After all, it's almost 1,800 feet long. That's more than a third of a mile. And we forgot to take our flashlight. One of our group had some cigar-shaped light sticks, which we gave to every fourth person. That didn't give us very much light, but it was still a most exciting experience. The tunnel is not made in a straight line. There are all kinds of curves, and sometimes like this, a dead-end turnoff. We know the men started digging from the two ends. How they ever managed to meet cutting through this rock is a real mystery. We do not know how long they worked, but they were no sluggards, for the time of the siege was at hand and they had to get that water into the city. And incredibly, the two groups met. An inscription was made to celebrate that meeting, and it was carved right into the rock where a schoolboy accidentally found it about 100 years ago. And this is what it says. The boring through is completed. This is the story of the tunnel. While the stone cutters were lifting up the rock, lifting up the pick, each toward his neighbor from opposite ends, and while they were yet 3 cubits apart, there was heard a voice of one calling to the other. And after that, pick struck against pick, and the waters flowed from the spring to the pool, 1,200 cubits. And 100 cubits was the height of the rock above. The Bible speaks of it, and we can walk through it. And that was most exciting. I think, again, that this is one of the times when the Bible states something very simply, incidentally, and yet it was such a beautiful, big project, and we were able to see it and to walk through it. I would say if any of you ever get to Israel, make sure that you walk through Hezekiah's tunnel, because it's one of those things that we know is for real. Now I want to tell you about Meggido. Meggido is a city that's right at the entrance of the Jezreel Valley. We hear about Meggido a lot, Jezreel, Esdraelon, and the valley in which Meggido is. Meggido is right over here, and it is the place where the roads meet. You see, it was the one spot through these mountains where the people could travel. And so, being in such a strategic position, there were many people who wanted to control Meggido, many countries if they could. Meggido was quite a high tell, and they worked in it not too long before they found how the people of Meggido had solved their water problem. And now I would like to show you what they did. We'll turn to some more slides. Meggido and its valley. I really thought the valley would be very large since you hear about it so much. The valley of Armageddon, Jezreel, Meggido, Esdraelon, all referring to the same place or parts within the same area. But perhaps the total size, since it is triangular in shape, is 15 miles on each side. Nothing like the valleys we think of in the western United States. But in this lesson, we are interested in the way people of the city obtained their water supply. And here is a sign indicating that perhaps only the hale and hearty should attempt the excursion. 183 steps down and 80 steps up after you traverse the tunnel. These steps have been built for tourists. Going down their carved spiral stairs with most likely no railing at all would be much more difficult for ancient women. And remember, you also had to carry a big water pot on your head. The tunnel itself is straight, perfectly straight, and it's 165 feet long. Here, too, the workers began at the two ends. This can be determined because of the way the pick and the axe marks are slanted. When they came together, there was an adjustment of a little over 3 feet in the line of the wall. Not bad. At the end of the tunnel was the pool from the spring, which had been covered up from the outside so enemy forces would not detect its presence. And now again, the steps are open, 80 of them, leading from the spring to the ground level outside that city mound. So when you think about how it was a problem for people in the ancient days to get their water supply, you can understand more readily why there are so many references to this in the scripture. For instance, in Psalm 42, 1 and 2, we read, "As thirsts the heart for water brooks, so thirsts my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God." Or Psalm 63, "O God, thou art my God, early will I seek thee. My soul thirsteth for thee. My flesh longeth for thee in a dry and thirsty land where no water is. Or Psalm 143:6, I stretch forth my hand unto thee, and my soul searcheth after thee as a thirsty land. But God answers, and he says, therefore with joy shall ye draw waters out of the wells of salvation. Or he says, ho, everyone that thirsteth, come ye to the waters in Isaiah. Or the promise comes, they shall not hunger nor thirst, neither shall the heat nor sun smite them, for he hath mercy on them. Even by the springs of water shall he guide them. And you remember when Jesus spoke to the woman at the well, he spoke to her about him being the living water, that water which would quench and satisfy man's soul. So even though there's a problem with the physical water, we know that Jesus is the one who can satisfy the longings of our soul, which can be worse than the thirst for physical water. You must wait on the Lord.